In the beginning, when the United States and the West threw their economic might against Russia, there was a universal narrative, one that I too at least kind of thought, man, the Russian economy is screwed. There really was no turning back. There simply seemed no way that Russia, a declining power with little resources other than minerals and oil, could hang on without some serious problem. That was based upon all of our general understanding of the global economy, one in which the global economy is backstopped by the US dollar and US power, one which the US and the West control to the global financial system, where if one is cut off, it becomes incredibly difficult to conduct commerce. Almost immediately, however, cracks began to show. It turned out the rest of the world didn't really agree with our view of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, or even if they did, they didn't care nearly enough to stop buying oil from Putin, especially when there was a good deal to be had. And slowly, something even more frightening is becoming clear. What if the United States isn't nearly as powerful as we once thought? What if we don't really have control over the global financial system as we wanted? And what if instead we have accelerated the development of multipolarity and a world where the US does not nearly have as much say in the affairs of the world? It's difficult 18 months later not to come to that conclusion, as we have a look at the middling effects that US sanctions have had on the Russian economy. Just last week came a stunning announcement from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. The Russian economy is going to grow this year by 1.5%. How can an economy so cut off from the West, so attacked, not only survive, but grow? The answer is important for us to understand. It tells a story of how the rest of the world is really not with us on Ukraine. The first and most important to that story is oil. The West and the US have cut themselves off. But as I said earlier, it doesn't mean the rest of the world is. And in fact, despite efforts by the European Union and the US to cap the price on Russian crude oil, the price is high enough at a discount that Russia has been able to facilitate enough money into its economy and fund its war machine. The Wall Street Journal even says that the current global position is especially advantageous to Russia. The countries most likely to depart from the Western Ukraine consensus are India, China, and other rapidly growing industrialized Asian countries. These Asian countries comprise almost 3/4 of all global economic growth this year. They are happily consuming Russian oil at a steep discount, fueling their industrial economies. Without Asian cooperation, Western sanctions have found themselves able only to slightly dent Russian revenues instead of cripple them as they once thought. This story, of course, has been told here many times now and looked at deeply. But the other question, the question of Russian economic resilience, is equally piercing in its indictment of Western sanctions. US and Western bans on exports to Russia, especially if anything thought to be able to fuel the war machine, was thought to be deadly to the Russian military's ability to wage war on Ukraine. However, instead of directly importing Western tech, the Kremlin simply buys it via third parties who are not subject to sanctions, namely former Soviet socialist republics, Armenia, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. By importing the exact same things through third parties, they quickly have been able to import materials they need for precision-guided weaponry, which in recent months has been bombarding Ukraine on a near daily basis. Even deeper than that, though, it's a profound view into what the real strength of an economy is, what matters when the chips are down. Despite being nearly cut off from the entire Western-led financial system, Russia has turned to its hard assets that it has at its disposal and is putting oil revenue to the most direct use, pumping it right back into the economy, spending massively on industrial production to continue the war effort. Russian government spending is now 14% of the entire country's GDP, with an explosion of weapons and ammunition spending and of computers, electronics, optical outputs. The government has effectively created a government stimulus by orienting its spending around the war effort, with an increase in material being sent to the front line and easing the effect of any of the war at home. On the elite front, sanctions too have clearly failed. One of the efforts by the West was to wage economic war on Russian oligarchs and billionaires with two hopes. One, seize the assets, create economic problems inside Russia. The other, fuel rebellion against Putin, encourage people to speak out and save their finances. Almost no high-profile oligarchs, however, have spoken out, save for that very weird Prigozhin coup that lasted for 48 hours. Instead, something else entirely has occurred. Many oligarchs now seem entirely cut off from their finances in the West, have found themselves actually more dependent on Putin than ever before. They can't speak out because it means absolute financial destruction at home. And as long as they and their families are inside Russia, they more or less have less agency than they once did when they simply relied on him, but also were able to hobnob with the Western financial elite. And all of this is a familiar story, the law of unintended consequences, and worse, a reveal of what power the US has in real terms. We have discovered our ability to compel another nation to do what we want in financial terms actually didn't work. And worse, we have forced our actual strategic partners in Asia to make a choice between their own economies and a moral war we're waging, which does not affect our actual material interests. The end result of this will be a study by Beijing. How do you sanction-proof your entire economy? And an eye-opening across South America and Asia. They have much more autonomy than they once thought without being touched by US public opinion. The net result is one which nobody wanted. The West and the US are weaker. Ukraine is under siege, embroiled in a devastating war of attrition. The Kremlin has zero signs of stopping. If that's not the definition of failure, I'm not sure what is. I mean, everybody predicted otherwise. They not only survived, IMF says they're going
Hey guys, obviously I had a lot of thoughts on what Saagar had to say there. So if you want to see my thoughts on this monologue and every other Saagar monologue, make sure you subscribe at breakingpoints.com.